Good evening, everyone. My name is Matthew Ogden. I'm an editor with LaRouchepack.com, and thank you for joining us for our Friday night live webcast on the eve of the presidential elections. Obviously, we're here 4 days before the November 6th elections, and what Mr. LaRouche will say tonight will be highly significant for that reason and for others. Now, we're coming off of a very successful appearance that Mr. LaRouche gave at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. earlier this afternoon, along with Jeffrey Steinberg of EIR, which had a major presence of international press from countries around the world, China, from Spain, from the Middle East, from Georgia, from Africa, and elsewhere. And obviously, what Mr. LaRouche said there earlier today will get very extensive coverage around the world. Mr. LaRouche's keynote from that event is already available on the LaRouche Pack website, and you can expect Jeffrey Steinberg's opening remarks and also the question and answer session to be available by later this evening. So we encourage you to watch that as soon as you conclude this event tonight. But what Mr. LaRouche has to say right now, we will follow the usual format of our Friday night webcasts here. Mr. LaRouche will have some opening remarks, which I know he has prepared, and then that will be followed by some questions and answers from in the studio here. So without any further ado, I'm proud to introduce to you Mr. Lyndon LaRouche.
Well, thank you. I should begin by saying, as I said earlier today, that you don't know anything about what is about to occur in the United States now until later. In other words, the election will be finished, and then you will begin to find out what the real action is. And it is not the election, it's something much more profound and much more extensive. First of all, we're dealing mainly when dealing with Obama, we're dealing with the Benghazi incidents which have occurred. First of all, his launching of an illegal war under the U.S. Constitution. It was an illegal campaign that he ran. And it also is mass murderous campaign, which was the theme set into motion about the original war that Obama ran, and it is also the precedent for what will follow since then and has followed since then. So we're on the verge of events which are beyond the understanding of most people in the United States, including some leading people who have no comprehension of what's about to happen during the middle of this week onward. And that's the thing to be emphasized. Now, first of all, is to recognize that we're immediately in a situation where we're headed toward the threat of global thermonuclear warfare. And by that I mean the approach very soon, as probably after the election attempt, which will not be conclusive in itself. But we're headed toward a thermonuclear warfare. And if it occurs, it'll be global. It will probably be started, in effect, the actual global war be started by the United States. It will be the Ohio-class submarines and similar kinds of capabilities delivering thermonuclear capabilities, weaponry, which are not possessed by really any other nation generally. And so that's where we stand. That's the key thing. The second thing to consider is in this series is the fact that Obama is continuing the policies of Adolf Hitler in terms of health care. And the T4 healthcare program by Adolf Hitler, which was the beginning of the genocide under the Hitler regime, is the exact precedent on which Obama is operating today. And therefore, the danger is, if this, as I emphasized earlier today, that if this war is launched, it will be an extermination warfare, because the United States will probably start it. There are already wars going on, warfare that has been caused by Obama already. But when the crucial point is the point that the present kind of wars, which are going on under the Obama administration particularly, and the British monarchy, and the Saudi families, that this warfare will suddenly reach a point where it's no longer a limited warfare of the type we know in process now, but it will become thermonuclear warfare. And probably, if this will take about less than an hour and a half of thermonuclear bombardment on all sides concerned. And that will leave the United States and the planet as a whole in a desperate situation from which mankind may not recover. And that's the point. Now, the typical case of this, as I said, in dealing with Obama, you're dealing with a Hitler-type mentality. Precisely. His healthcare policies, the so-called T4 healthcare policies, were the origin of this policy. The same policy has been in process from Britain under the relevant British figures, Tony Blair. Tony Blair is the precedent in Hitler's policy in terms of health care for the United Kingdom. It's a T4 policy all over. What Obama has introduced step by step since his inauguration, especially since the spring of that year, April of that year, what he's been pushing for is a similar T4 program, which has been in operation inside the United States against U.S. citizens, though it's not reached its full maximum yet, by any means. So that's what we did. That's one thing. We have to understand also that this warfare is absolutely crazy, absolutely insane. The human species probably could not outlive an hour and a half of that kind of exchange of warfare, launched first by the United States, but under the direction of the British monarchy. The Queen is the mother of this evil. You know? And let's be clean. I think she dropped her pantaloons or something from space over a stadium in Britain, and it was considered some kind of a cheerful event for some people's taste, not mine in particular. And the other part of the problem, which we have to deal with, which is slower and deeper, but is the so-called green policy. Now, this is contrary to all physical, biological, economic principles, that any species which does not increase its effectiveness within the range of species to rise in energy flux density is a doomed species. And if the United States were to continue with the so-called program of environmentalism, which is the Queen's policy, which is she herself has emphatically defined her policy as one of genocide, with the immediate target to reduce the human population of the planet from the present level estimated at 7 billion people to 1 or less. And under those conditions, with those kinds of policies, the human species could not survive other conditions in which we exist now. So therefore, the Queen has to be pushed to one side, and so forth. Now, the major problem that we have to deal with, apart from those with which people are generally familiar, more or less familiar, is that we have a problem of asteroids and things of the similar nature which are already threatening mankind on Earth. We have not had an extinction event of human species within what we generally know as our lifetime, though there have been conditions on this planet already which take an asteroid hitting Earth has probably caused a mass extinction effect of some species, whatever species were around during that period. We're now in the danger, because the ripeness for this kind of problem is increasing, that if we do not do something in this direction, that is to reverse the policies of Obama on space, because if we do not develop the ability in space to deal with these kinds of satellites that are constantly coming through the Earth orbit, and they're coming through the whole region, from Mars down to Venus, that these orbits are there. And these always represent a threat to very large-scale extinction of the populations of part of the planet, and under certain conditions would lead to a full termination of living processes on this planet. Our mission must be to develop the thermonuclear capabilities and beyond in a higher form, which enable us to reach Mars, not to live there, but to perform missions there, which are necessary. And one of the key principles for that challenges for our Martian exploration is to develop it from Earth through thermonuclear technologies at the least, if not higher order policies, in order to deal with the threat to mankind's existence, which are represented by this stream, a countless stream of asteroids, which are coming through the Earth orbit constantly. And if we do not develop the ability to stop those things and defeat them, divert them, and the diversion of them or defeat of them is a feasible operation. We just need the thermonuclear power to do it. And so these are the kinds of things we face. So we need these kinds of technologies. Mankind's survival as a species has depended on a number of things. First of all, mankind is the only species known to us which is capable of voluntary creativity. All other species, like many of our inferior, say, Wall Street types, do not believe in the creative noetic powers of the human species, but rather think that you can only forecast the past, not the future. The typical person says you can only deduce the future from the same technology which you're living in now. The fact of the matter that only as the human species in particular is able to increase its unique capability in creativity, that mankind has the ability to meet these challenges. And we have to meet these challenges not only for the living species of man, we have to also meet the challenge for the purpose of animal life and so forth as well. And these are the things that have to be done. Now, we are now in the danger here. We face a military policy by the British monarchy, who's the initiator, and who Obama represents fully. He's nothing but a stooge for the British monarchy. For example, he has Tony Blair, the guy who runs the T4 type, Hitler T4 type operation on health care in Britain, notorious. They prescribe a percentile of the population they're going to kill in the hospital system. Murder. This is exactly what Hitler did. There's no difference. The only thing that's lacking is the scale on which Hitler, relative to the total population, did it. But it's the same policy as Adolf Hitler. There is no difference in morality and intention between Adolf Hitler and Obama. And that's the lesson you've got to learn. So he must be removed from office. He's committed the crimes, and whether he's nominally elected or not on Tuesday evening, I doubt it. The probability is that nobody will know who got really elected when for some time to come beyond this coming Tuesday. Because the fraud which we know of, or the capacity for fraud in Ohio and other states, is such that we may not know who actually won. Because the Obama crew does not report the filings of these things in such a way that you can honestly know which are fake and which are real. And the difference is massive. No one really knows what the actual count would be in terms of sort of a close race. You have a jammed up operation, and we never know who is the actual president of the United States. That's the kind of situation we have to deal with. And so that's our situation, that mankind has to realize that this presidency, and many presidencies before, have been failures. For example, Jack Kennedy, President John F. Kennedy, was actually an heir in terms of devotions to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This devotion was prompted in the case of Jack by the widow of President Franklin Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt. Her advice and influence to bring her husband's approach to policy to bear was the basis for the Kennedy administration. This does not mean that Kennedy himself did not have a lot of originality in his work independently, but the principle that he expressed in his work as president was an echo of what Eleanor Roosevelt represented in terms of the memory of her husband. And this is the kind of thing we must go to. Remember that the last time we had net progress in the condition of mankind in this nation of ours came to an end with the death of John F. Kennedy. We have never had the net increase in conditions of life and so forth on this nation that we had under Jack Kennedy since. We went immediately into a cutback in all kinds of technological progress in general. We went to fight a war which should not have been fought. It was a war by the United States, used by people in Wall Street and elsewhere to destroy the United States. In other words, it was a war to destroy the United States, and you see the end of it by 1948. You see it. That we have a whole generation, and a great part of that generation, university graduates or undergraduates and so forth, and they were not really human by the standards of the people who were young people of the same age group. Like, for example, Bill Clinton. President Bill Clinton had been attached, very much inspired by John F. Kennedy. He made a sort of a pilgrimage, shall we say, among others, to meet Kennedy. And then, but the generation that came after Bill Clinton, at the academic level, was poisoned. It was poisoned by the effects that were orchestrated together with this prolongation of war, a totally unnecessary war, a useless war, a criminal war, which did the most to destroy our nation quickly during the period of the late 1940s and in the early 1950s, 70s rather. And so this is the kind of situation. So we must come to the point, and we look throughout the planet. We look at the fact that the continental Europe, all of Europe in general, is disintegrating. All Western Europe is disintegrating. We're going into a hyperinflation in Europe. And if this continues, you are not going to have a recognizable Europe in the near future. And this is what the British Queen, the British policy, the British Empire has represented. And so therefore we have to find solutions. Now the other part of this thing is we are already on the edge of thermonuclear warfare. If Obama continues to be president, you are almost certain that his thrust will be under British direction to reduce the human species to a fraction of its present population. In other words, mass murder on a greater scale than that of Adolf Hitler. And that is what the potential is, which is located in the embodiment of this president. He must be removed from office. And if he's not removed by vote, he should be removed for criminality. Because he is a criminal. And that's where we stand today. Now, our problem is this. Take the case of thermonuclear war. I will address this today on another occasion. If we go into thermonuclear war, there will not be a surviving culture. Probably not even a surviving human population. If you take the mass effect of thermonuclear weapons and similar related weapon systems, which are required to launch and conduct a thermonuclear war, what does it mean? If this occurs, in other words, you've now got a situation, say, in Libya, and the war in Libya, which is orchestrated by the United Nations, or people in the United Nations, and by the British and by Obama. Remember, Obama is the criminal in launching this wave of warfare. Obama has violated the Constitution in launching that war, conducting that war. He's violated all our laws, all our constitutional laws, totally. He's not a sane person. He must be removed from office because he's morally insane. And moral insanity is just as bad as any other form of insanity. Sometimes it's even worse because it's willful. He's a man who does not like anybody. He hates everybody. He likes to kill. He almost giggles at doing evil to people who are his chosen victims. He has killed people literally again and again and again. He's a mass murderer. He's a worse mass murderer than any other mass murderer recently. The famous mass murderer is nothing compared to Obama. He's the super mass murderer. He's the one that goes to thermonuclear war. And the Queen herself is involved in this. It's her policy. The whole thing, for example, 9/11, as I emphasized today, 9/11 was launched by the British monarchy together with the Saudi monarchy through the medium of the system they put together. And it's all known. But all the stories about this are complete lies. It was the Saudi kingdom which actually played the key point inside the United States under British direction and Saudi direction, especially the BEA direction, which actually organized 9/11 number 1. We just have had an experience with 9/11 number 2, coming from the same sources. This time from the Saudi kingdom, which is stirring up all of this mass killing in Asia, near Asia, in Africa, and so forth. So this is the problem. We must remove what Obama represents as a stooge of the British monarchy, as a stooge of this alliance, this group, which is exactly what's going on now, this operation. So therefore, we must restore civilization. We must restore progress in science-driven progress. We must extend our reach to space. We must develop further what we've started on in terms of Mars. And the recent development is extremely important in this respect. We can communicate with Mars back and forth at the speed of light. And at the speed of light, with thermonuclear capabilities, we can draw in together the problems of this part of space between Mars and Venus. We can pull that together. We can also, therefore, explore space. It does not mean we're going to colonize space. I don't know how we could live on the moon for extended periods of time. There are many biological problems there to be solved before we can do that. But we can, as we did with recently, by putting an apparatus, properly developed apparatus, to work on Mars, by coordinating the operations between man's mind on Earth and the machines that we put on Mars, connected by the speed of light, with thermonuclear capabilities to affect this operation. We can begin to control this part of the solar system, between the Mars orbit and Venus, for example. And mankind, therefore, can undertake missions which will enable mankind to secure human life and to secure its development. And that's where we should be today. We must remove those obstacles, such as Obama, who should simply be thrown out of office for his criminal behavior. The fraud, for example, of the way he took over a war in Libya, expanded it in violation of the U.S. Constitution. This man should have been thrown out of office already. And we're simply looking for the right group of people who are real patriots, who will throw Obama out of office, and we can get our nation back.
If you're just tuning in, you're watching a live webcast, Election Eve webcast with Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. He just finished his opening remarks, and I will say that something that you mentioned earlier today, just as a setup for our first question, take the conditions in New York City right now, Lower Manhattan. What you mentioned earlier is that This is merely exemplary of the conditions that the entire nation can expect to face promptly after this election is over, if your policy, if your program is not implemented immediately by the next presidency of the United States. And, the entire nation is vulnerable when it comes to these kinds of existential disasters. There was a actually interesting op-ed that I read earlier this week that asked the question, could the United States survive a double disaster? Say Hurricane Sandy had hit the East Coast while a big earthquake had hit the West Coast. Are we in the condition to physically and economically survive that kind of disaster? So I would like Leandra Bernstein to come up to the podium just to ask a question on this similar theme.
Thank you. So with large contingency of both organizers, associates of LaRouche PAC, and supporters in the New York, New Jersey region, question has come in quite a bit. What can be done in the aftermath of the destruction of Hurricane Sandy? And I mean, what we're already looking at on the ground is approximately 88 deaths in the United States, billions of dollars worth of damage. Oddly enough, Wall Street was closed for a few days, but they opened up on Wednesday after the Monday storm. Apparently, some might say they got a bailout from the heavy rains. But on a more serious note, I mean, you have Staten Island is decimated. People who have been cut off from power might not get it back until November 11th, which is, obviously after the November 6th elections. The access to food, to refrigeration, to gasoline has all been cut off for a hugely populated area of the country. And so with that situation on the ground, we have a similar situation in above ground in terms of our ability to, what our forecasting ability was during Hurricane Sandy, where due to the satellite systems that we have in place, the geostationary orbiting satellites that we have in place over North America, we were able to see this hurricane, forecast its path. But that system is and has been under the Obama administration being cut progressively. So that satellite system has been cut, our eye in the sky, as well as our feet on the ground, with major cuts to the Army Corps of Engineers. So I'd like you to ask answer a very widespread question: what is to be done in the aftermath of this hurricane?
There's nothing you can do if you don't eliminate Obama. Now, Obama is not the source of evil. He's only a degenerate of the sense of evil. The sense of evil lies in an ancient tradition. The ancient tradition of the persecution of a nation up there in the north in the famous war. And since that time, the oligarchical system has dominated known civilized culture or uncivilized culture. This led to the phenomenon we call the Roman Empire. And all the systems of empire which have dominated this planet most of the time, since that time, have actually been genocidal. Now, you have the case right now, this culmination of that is the Queen of England. The Queen of England, with her bloomers blowing up or whatever, was parachuted down into an area of entertainment or something there. But the point is, the Queen has specified her intention as actually the legal, implicitly, legal descendant of the Roman Empire. That's what she is. She's not British. She's actually a continuation of a period of imperialism. Now, unfortunately, Europe and other parts of Eurasia have been dominated by imperialism most of the time. And therefore, they have suffered this kind of persecution, this kind of destruction. We in the United States, by the success of Nicholas of Cusa and others, in their efforts in that century, actually opened up inside North America, and attempted to do in South America as well, opened up a new conception which we became in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And now this colony was crushed eventually by the British Empire, which is actually the fourth, was called the second empire. And so therefore there has been a continual quarrel since that time, since the Massachusetts settlement, and earlier Nicholas of Cusa. There's been a quarrel between the imperial systems of the world and their derivatives, and what was represented earlier by Nicholas of Cusa, people of that tradition, and by the United States, or what became the United States. Now, we have been bigoted, so to speak, and buffeted by this kind of process. We have been destroyed again and again. Andrew Jackson, for example, is one of the key instruments which have destroyed the morality and character of the people of the United States. And we have never rid ourselves of the Jackson tradition. But he was not really the boss. Jackson was, in his mental state as president, he was in pretty bad shape. He was a cranky old man cursing out people and things of that sort, and doing dirty things. But the real operation was run by the British monarchy, which ran the operation which was that administration. And this administration, out of Jackson's regime, became the thing that led to the extension of the slave system in the United States, the slavery system. This is the slavery system which led into what's called the Civil War. And the recurrence of this kind of thinking, as by Theodore Roosevelt, one of the worst pieces of pig you ever wanted to know about, who was part of the same tradition. The same thing has gone on. Roosevelt was extremely important in this respect because he gave us a breakthrough in which what was going on in Germany would have worked, would have succeeded. So Franklin Roosevelt is responsible for the degree of civilization which has survived at this time, because it was his administration and the measures it took which enabled us to become again the United States. And once he was dead, they brought a Wall Street clown, Truman, in as president. We've had episodes of back and forth of presidents with good intentions but bad capabilities and that sort of thing, and bad presidents with bad capabilities also. And that's what the way this thing works. We have to understand that there are principles which are mandatory, which mean progress. It means no more zero growth, no more reversal, no more depopulation, no more going back to green. Green is death. It's the color of rotting death corpses. We don't want that. And therefore the time has come that we're going to have to change that. And we have the opportunity now, because the failure which is embedded in the Obama campaign for re-election as president and the consequences of that, that failure challenges us to get rid of that enemy within us and within Europe. If we don't, we're finished. But what happened as of Tuesday night, or will have happened by Tuesday night, will be in itself of no consequence. None of its consequences. What will happen after then. Because Obama is a failure. He's a menace. He's a disease, not a person. He's a failure. The Republican candidate is a fool. And he demonstrated that in Florida with the last debate he had with Obama. He's not capable of managing this presidency. We're going to go in as a nation, and with a nation of the world, we're going to have to shift into a new program of development which reverses all this crap and puts us back on the road, which we say called the Franklin-Roosevelt road for world reform. We've entered into a period where thermonuclear weapons are so destructive that no war can ever be fought with thermonuclear weapons on a general basis. We're now at the point, a crucial point, in which we're teetering at the edge of launching thermonuclear war from the United States under British monarchy direction. Tony Blair, for example, is the guy who immediately controls Obama for the Queen of England. You find he's in and out of Chicago trafficking. You notice at the time that Obama was brought into the presidency that it was Tony Blair who was assigned to guide and instruct him. The master was the Queen of England, the Queen, but he has been the instrument. He's a filthy piece of crap. He should never have been allowed to be entered into anything among decent society. He is a mass murderer of the T4 Hitler style. Obama himself, as a follower of Blair, is also a mass murderer of the same type. He's the one who's running a T4 type genocide and attempting to install this fully inside the United States. How do you think they intend to get down from a population, world population, of 7 billion people, which it was recently, and to reduce it to approximately 1 billion? How do they intend to do that? You see it being done all the time. You see it being done in what was done in New York City in the recent effects of this operation. This was an act of genocide. The material that should have been installed in the bay, the access to Manhattan and to the Staten Island and so forth, this stuff was not done. Why wasn't it not done? This could have been prevented. It was prevented in the case of New Orleans and the reform there. It was done in Rhode Island. Why wasn't it done for Manhattan? We now have people in southern Manhattan who are dying in the buildings that they occupied because they have no elevation. They have no food supplies delivered to them, or virtually none. We're putting the whole crew, and Wall Street is still tolerated while this crap is going on. So we've come to a point where we as a nation will have to look at what our morality should be concerning our own nation and what our morality should be concerning other nations. We must also understand that since we've reached the point that thermonuclear war cannot be fought as a winnable war. Thermonuclear war is an extinction event. Therefore, it means, since thermonuclear war is the only kind of war today which can dominate the planet as a force, we can no longer allow thermonuclear war or war in general to function. Now, the history of war goes back to the siege of Troy for us, what we know of it, because it was that was an extinction war. Most, except for a few children and aged women and so forth, nobody was allowed to live after the defeat of Troy. And this is fact. This is not just some fairy story. This is a fact. They salted the earth so food could no longer be grown in that area again. Similar things like that happened under the Roman influence in the area of what we call Tunis. And so therefore this system, which we can trace in terms of the Homer's Iliad, that this is the system of oligarchism. And we must exterminate this oligarchic system and its slave system from this planet. We must develop a culture which is not based on suppressing the majority of the population into a phase of relative stupidity. Even people in the United States have been turned into stupid creatures. Our children, our young children, our adolescents are being turned into monsters. by this kind of culture which has been introduced since the assassination of John Kennedy, in particular. And it's been getting worse all the time. We have to understand that since thermonuclear war, there is no victory in thermonuclear war. Mankind cannot survive thermonuclear war. Therefore, we must realize that the idea of warfare as a system is a product of the oligarchical system as far as it concerns nations. And it's the oligarchical system which the Queen of England today represents as the chief representative. Her policies of genocide, the reduction of the human population from 7 billion to 1 billion or less, which is her policy, Tony Blair's policy. And Tony Blair is a skunk who's in charge of genocide, against people in England. It's his program of genocide against the sick. The same hit policy as Hitler's T4 policy. So the British Queen is doing exactly what Hitler was credited with doing. Only she can do it on a larger scale. And she's conceived to do it by reducing the human beings to relatively stupid creatures who lack the intellectual ability to maintain a civilization, reducing them to crude servants of some sort of thing, and reducing their population, keeping them stupid and harmless from the standpoint of the oligarchy. That time is ended. The legacy of the siege of Troy must come to an end at last. And we must understand that the reason we go to war, or similar things like warfare, similar kinds of evil, is because there's an evil which has taken us over. The name of that evil is the oligarchical system, typified by the Roman Empire and by what followed, and by the British monarchy, the British Empire today. And once we recognize that our problem now is not to kill, not to achieve great power as such. Our responsibility is to free the planet of the tyranny of such forms of power. And we recognize that and get a culture back, then we can do something.
Well, you'd mentioned on the subject of economics, you'd mentioned the flood prevention, the surge prevention program that could have been implemented in Manhattan, the kind of flood control that Providence, Rhode Island does have. And if you think about it, you might say, well, there was a presentation made in 2009 to New York about the proposal for building a flood control system. They didn't do it. Obviously, the cost would have been much less than the expense of this hurricane. And you might say, well, there's probably a lot of projects like that around the country. This wasn't the only one that wasn't built. And it gives you a sense of how much is needed in terms of what could be done with a whole economic revival. Now, what I wanted to ask you about was the election and our political system. There's obviously a lot of difficulty as regards voting in New York and New Jersey, where many polling stations have no electricity, are full of sand, don't exist anymore, are now a tent, and that's the state of New York is providing generators, but not the ability to install all of them. So there's a real potential for a great deal of chaos as regards to voting there. The other thing is early voting. Now, having paper ballots provides a trail. Having paper ballots isn't a bad thing, but the numbers of these are pretty astounding now. Over 600,000 people have already voted in Nevada, almost 600,000 in Iowa, 1.2 million in Ohio, 1.5 million in Colorado so far, record levels in other states. The thing with this is that if somebody gets one of these ballots by mail and then decides to vote in person, they have to cast what's called a provisional ballot, and then there's time to have to check it out, see if they sent in a mail ballot, whatnot. It definitely means that you're not going to be able, unless the victor is quite clear, there's no guarantee in having a final electoral result on the day of the election, as you've been discussing. In New York, if you postmark your ballot on time, they're allowing 2 weeks for it to arrive by mail, so they can't really call any election until November 19th, for example. So, now, you've said that a real deal of excitement is going to be taking place after the election, after at least the day of the actual election. I'd like to hear if you have some more to say about that. Also, I wanted to let viewers know, if they're not aware, that in 2000, at the Bush-Gore election, again, the weekend before, you in a discussion to some of your associates in California had said that it was not certain that the election would actually be decided on Election Day, which is indeed what happened. So I'd like to know your thoughts on that, and then also in a more specific sense, in times like this, it seems rather nebulous how the political system functions. And makes you wonder, well, if we got these two presidential candidates, neither of them is really deserving to serve. You've mentioned the importance of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in preventing general war already, the necessity for the presidency itself as an institution. What do you see as the relationship between the population generally and the institutions that are going to be able to direct the nation to the extent that the general population is an appropriate audience for that?
Well, this is a complicated question because it involves a number of time factors. For example, we now have a population which is not really capable of voting for an election. And the very essence of the question of what they're voting for, they're not voting for anything. They're voting for an impression. They're voting to be a cow in the sheep stall, or something of that nature. There is no sane motive behind most of the electoral returns. Nothing, and a lot of it's just fake anyway. As we saw in the case of the election of Obama, his victory over Hillary Clinton, was a fraud. It was a fraud all over the place. It was run by the drug runners. You know, they have this character who was, as his youth, worked for Hitler against Jews in Germany and elsewhere. And he's now a high muckety-muck in British circles and very close to the Queen's interest. And this kind of thing. And also you have a population in which we do no longer educate our citizens. Very few citizens today, relative to, say, the time that Jack Kennedy was president, very few actually are capable of thinking competently about voting. The voting system has been, it's like as I've said a number of times, it's like the Roman arena. You have the emperor sits in the middle of the arena, the great arena. The people are sitting there. You have victims such as gladiators, or I'm gladiator, or whatever it is. And they're out there, they're waiting for judgment from the emperor. And the emperor goes thumbs down or thumbs up. And similar kinds of operation. This is called our election system. That's what our election system is today. Most citizens haven't got the slightest idea in the world of what the results of an election will be in terms of their fate, or the nation's fate. They haven't got the slightest idea in the world. They say, well, I hear this is the good thing. I hear that's the bad thing. I hear this is that. They don't know what they're voting for. They're acting like a crowd in any large stadium which is cheering for they know what, not what. I mean, they don't know what that actor is out in the field, the team player. They don't know anything, but they are guided by impressions, not by knowledge. The thinking apparatus is not called into question. When people who can think enter the stadium to observe an event of that type, they drop thinking on the way in and don't quite regain it fully on the way out. This is our culture. Now, the problem here is a real systemic problem. It's really the basis for oligarchical control. You take a spirit, an idea, which is characteristic of the Roman arena under the emperors, and you will take that idea and you call it a football stadium, or a milder form, say a baseball stadium, something. So they get the passions are all there. They adopt their passions, their favorites, just as in the Roman Empire. The citizens voted for the favorites. What was the content of the favorites? I like his tie. Or some foolish thing like that. So there really is no reason. There's a choice, but not reason. And choice without reason is not really choice. And therefore, by getting people to become stupefied enough to believe in the theme of the arena, whether it's the football arena, or the baseball arena, or whatever, hockey arena, whatnot, that the point is once the population begins to run politics on this basis, you no longer have rationality in government. Because the people become a pack of fools by trusting somebody who they don't even know. They don't know what they think. They don't have any idea what the standard is. They like the appearance of that person, or they like the fact that 5 other people would have them desire to like that person. So the typical citizen is unqualified to choose his own government because of this. And this was understood. Andrew Jackson is a typical case. How was the United States destroyed? Andrew Jackson. Now, Andrew Jackson didn't have the brains to do the destruction. Other people who were British agents did. So Andrew Jackson would become a foul-mouthed creature in his own regime, simply opened up the gates for the destruction of the United States. And if you want to take a man who was a criminal, who occupied a high office, Andrew Jackson was a criminal in office, a criminal in the way he was elected, a criminal in what happened. It was Andrew Jackson and his criminal operations, run from London, by the way, by way of New York. London's agents planted in New York City and in Boston ran the whole operation. So we have been cursed as a nation from what we were in our original intention as a nation by this kind of corruption. Why? Because our citizens choose to be stupid. They choose to go with the mob, not the ideas. They don't take responsibility for the consequence of what they've chosen. They don't say, this is wrong. They say, oh, it didn't work out too well. And they go back to the next piece of folly. They don't like a Republican this term, they go to a Democrat. They don't like that Democrat, they go to the Republicans. It's the same kind of silly nonsense. And what we have to do is eliminate the idea that the choice of presidency is based on sectional interest. That has to end. The party system must come to an end. That doesn't mean we can't have parties. It means that the presidential selection, or the selection of the national government, must be based on its own terms, not on sectional considerations. And as long as we continue this sectionalism, which is the way the British Empire, since the Roman Empire, has played the fools, our citizens have turned out to be fools who brought upon themselves their own bad destiny. And they've got to wake up and stop saying, well, I like this guy. I belong to this party. Huh? I belong to this party. Why are you going to vote like that? Because I belong to this party. What are they doing? Well, I like them. What's that mean? Well, I like them. That's my opinion. Don't talk me out of it. That's my opinion. That's what I'm going to vote for. And those idiots out there are doing that now. So it's the people of the United States who, in effect, are allowing this to them to do this to themselves. What is their complaint? Like this Christie, I mean, this creature. I don't know whether he's wider or taller. It's almost difficult to tell. I know there's a lot of waste there someplace, of some kind or another. And then he clanks up with this mayor of New York, who's a bigger, fatter fool, but a more wealthy one. And he is the one who helped to do this dirty work, which result we see in Petition. If the projects had been put into place, the other final thing is, on this same point, is that we no longer actually produce wealth. We produce symbols. We become symbol-minded. We don't know what we're doing. We say, we like this, or I'm told that we should like this, or this is what everybody is wearing this year. And that sort of thing. We've got to stop being silly fools. We talk about democracy. What is democracy if the person inside doesn't have a head? doesn't have a brain because they're not using it. They're using some other agency to influence them. And the American people have got to take a great deal of personal responsibility for their own manifestations of precisely this kind of stupidity. Then they begin to cheer for war. This is the Roman Empire principle. Cheer for a war. We're going to beat those guys. We're going to defeat them. We're going to crush them. And who gets crushed? Civilization. And the crushing of civilization produces an effect for everyone. And everyone becomes a damn fool. And only if we can deal with that effectively. Now we've come to a point, as in this case in New York City. What's been done there, this amounts to mass murder. And it amounts to willful mass murder. Because many of the things that could have been done were not done. Why not? Because some people wanted money or didn't want to have to pay taxes for the right to live. Now we have people living in buildings in southern Manhattan, and they may be going 12 or 14 or 15 stories up and down just to get basics. Older people. This is happening all throughout that region of southern Manhattan. And they're dying of a lack of food. Throughout Manhattan, whole parts of the city have no food supplies available to people in that city. They are now being cursed, being killed, like a T4 operation by Adolf Hitler or the British Queen. And they're being murdered. And nothing is being done. And under Obama, nothing will be done to alleviate the problem. The island of Manhattan will become a relative wasteland, like other parts of that area. This is mass murder. And it's done under Obama and people like him. It's done by Christie. It's done by the mayor of New York City. It's done by similar people. And people put up with it. Why do they put up with it? Because they don't want representative government. They want to be members of a crowd, a part of a crowd, which feels good about itself. They don't care what the reality is. They just want the momentary sense of prestige or something equivalent, or getting some little thing which is precious to them. And we've lost the moral commitment to educate our own people to understanding what truth is, what good is. People no longer recognize what good is. You find that young people more and more, what do they find as entertainment and recreation? They find destructive acts. They hunt each other down. They play games. They kill each other more and more. And what we've done under this process since Jack Kennedy was assassinated, and then with the 68ers in 1968, absolute degenerates. I know it. I was there. I dealt with them. The leaders of that movement were degenerates, moral degenerates. But they became respectable because somebody said they were respectable. So the time has come, we must eliminate the idea of popularism. I think it's the best term for it. And realize that people must understand, with the aid of school systems, must understand what reality is. When not saying, well, he has a right to his opinion. No, he does not have a right to his opinion. He has his right to have access to shaping a good opinion, an honest opinion. And his gimmick, his kick, is not a standard for politics. Therefore, we face now, if we are going to use that kind of politics again now, after Tuesday, if Obama does not already, under orders, launch thermonuclear war at that point, then we're still in deep trouble. And things will never get better. The time now is we got to say, kill this system. We want the citizens to vote as citizens in their political constituency. We want them to think. We want to confront them Challenge them when they're doing stupid things. You've got to tell them they're doing stupid things. You've got to tell them what the solution is. You've got to explain it to them. You've got to teach them. But you've also got to find teachers who are qualified to do that. And I think the best way is when we impose upon ourselves as a people, mea culpa. Mea culpa. I have not done my duty. And that's the only solution. But in the meantime, the danger is thermonuclear war. And it's right here at our doorstep. It could come on Wednesday. Under Obama, it could come on Wednesday.
Right. Well, I have a follow-up to those remarks. We got a question in from Keisha Rogers, who is the Democratic nominee for the 22nd District in Texas, and she sends her greetings to you. And for those who are not aware, Keisha Rogers, she won her primary this year along with the Democratic primary this year along with the Democratic primary in 2010. And won it on the platform of defeating Obama, restoring NASA, and this year on the three-point program. So what she asks is, she says, as you know, my campaign here for the past few years has represented a defiance of party politics and represented a truly post-partisan campaign. It doesn't just represent a local campaign, but a campaign that is out to transform the nation. So the campaign has identified a platform above all the parties and for the future, and they're finding a very open response to the three-point policy. And people understand that they're not just election issues or election promises, but these are solutions that every patriot should be fighting for, that the nation must unite around. So that being said, and Keisha taking on the role she has in Texas, not just sloganeering, but providing leadership, providing education in every forum that she speaks in, every organizational meeting that she holds. She asks you the question, two questions, similar questions. Now that you have put the issue on the table of destroying the party system, what must be the strategy for like-minded patriots in continuing forward away from the corrupting influence of party loyalty? And second, she believes it's very important for people to understand the relationship of the institution of the presidency to the president himself, and how that relationship would function when the partisan system is no longer in effect.
Well, it's quite a parcel. It's not quite a parcel for me, because I know these things. But the fact is that most people in the United States today do not. Most citizens do not know what the score is. That simply. Why? Well, there are two reasons, principally two reasons. First of all, they're not educated. That is, not competently educated. They're educated in opinion, not in fact, not in truth. They have no sense of mission. There's no connection between the idea of mission and what they like, what they desire. For example, in the United States, what's happened? We used to be a great power, true great power. Where did that come from? It came from Detroit. It came from science driver programs. We were leaders in the world in terms of this. We had the greatest stimulus of almost any nation in the world generally. There were periods of German history under Bismarck, for example, which were very, powerful systems. But Bismarck himself based his reforms entirely on Abraham Lincoln's reforms. so that we had standards of goals and models of education that people could understand, physical principles. They were taught physical principles. What physical principles are taught to school today? Actually, almost none. People talk, they don't know what they're talking about. They haven't been educated. They've been not put through the kind of experience that would enable them to judge competently what the devil's going on. Why do you think we have war? People march off into wars, now on the edge of thermonuclear war. Why should they want to go to war? A thermonuclear war means an extinction war for all concerned. For example, if Obama, on Wednesday morning or Thursday morning of the coming week, were to put the United States to war, the damn fools would go there. And the result would be that probably no one would survive. If not immediately extinct, it would be down the line would be the same thing. In other words, the typical citizen today has no standard. They may be intelligent people, but they have no standard of performance which is gauged against reality. Why? Well, who is actually producing anything? The environmentalist is a person who doesn't produce anything. He actually shrinks the amount of production by his behavior, his policy. They go to a lower standard of productivity. And how can someone say they're being productive when they're going to a lower standard of productivity? In many cases, they're producing nothing. And they couldn't produce anything if they wished to, because they don't have the education, the guidance, or anything. So therefore, we have, in a sense, have tolerated, in the name of democracy, we've tolerated this destructive process. And that's where the problem lies. If we can say that openly, that's the problem, and tell people openly that that's the problem, and give them clinical demonstrations of that is the principle involved, by showing them what it means when they talk about green, they're talking about self-destruction. They're talking about suicide. Maybe slow suicide, but a suicide. And they want to call that a national policy? The green policy is the greatest enemy of the human species. No other enemy of humanity is known to us on this planet is more deadly than the belief in green.
Right, not even human. So this will be the last question. This comes from a visiting fellow at Georgetown and a reporter in Hong Kong. He says, "Dear Mr. LaRouche, during George W. Bush's time in office, anti-terrorism became the tool of the Republican Party policymaking. However, despite the fact that Obama professed himself to change that policy when he came in, the actual military pressures against America's so-called geostrategic enemies increased even more. This time in the name of humanitarian intervention. This policy outlook, quite frankly, puzzles many countries around the world. But the question I would like to ask you is on a slightly different subject. Thanks to the warming of the Arctic region, it is said that the Arctic Ocean will become navigable for 7 to 8 months of the year. And I think the question of how we can best utilize the Arctic will increase in its significance in world affairs. So my question to you is this: can there be a new force which comes to power in the United States to lead this type of development in the world, shifting away from the current outlook of geopolitics?
Well, I don't know of any ongoing effort in that direction, which is not something I share as a policy, which I find also in certain groups in other nations. Whenever you find a nation going through a cultural uptick in terms of trying to learn new technologies, more advanced technologies, greater goals, optimism about the human race. For example, Obama's space program, look at it. I mean, the man is a miserable creature, unfit for human company. He's a nothing. He's stupid. He's destroyed our space program. And we know that we depend upon the space program to be able to prevent Earth's population from being destroyed. Because sooner or later we are now in a period where we have to be able to intervene with the aid of bases of operation on Mars, which have not yet been developed. The option of going in that direction exists, but though we have not chosen to do the things which would enable the human species to survive. We then pick optional choices. I like this. I feel this. I hate that. With no sense of the value choices are meaningless. We have said it's better not to have industry in order to have green. We are starving. We don't have enough crops growing in the United States. We don't have enough farmers in the United States to feed the people of the United States itself. And that's the British policy of green. The British are an empire. They're not the England. They're not the nation of United Kingdom. The empire was established in the 18th century with a war. And the winning of that war set into creation an empire, the British Empire. And the British Empire then began gobbling up England. So England was devoured by the British Empire. It's like eating your child, that sort of thing. And that's what happened. So these are the kinds of problems which we have to deal with. We have to understand that the human species has to earn its right to survive. It has to earn that right by going to higher and higher levels of what we call technology, science-driven technology. More and more people have to become more productive in terms of that kind of technology. The green is the enemy of the human being. And we've got to get rid of that. If we don't, where's the jobs we used to have? Where are the productive jobs that Detroit used to have? The many of them, now just a few left. What about the food supply? We have a few giant agricultural giants, but they rob us. They cheat us. They cheat us of our own food in the name of food supply. And therefore, we are fools who allow ourselves to be talked into fashions. Well, everybody is doing it. And who is doing you is the question.
Good. Well, I thank you very much. That does bring a conclusion to our proceedings tonight. I will say that what you've said here tonight and also what you said earlier today in Washington, D.C., I think will prove to be of incredible historical significance. And I do encourage people, if you haven't seen it yet, to watch the proceedings at the National Press Club from earlier today, too. It is available on the LaRouche PAC website. So I thank Jason, I thank Leandra, I thank you, Mr. LaRouche, and we will be taking this same stage a week from today, next Friday, immediately following the November 6th elections. So that brings a conclusion to our proceedings tonight, and I thank you for watching. Stay tuned.